If you have nothing to direct your students, your staff, your families on how AI is going to be used, then it's just going to be the wild, wild west, and you have nothing to fall back on.
Welcome to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. Each week, we bring you discussions with educators on how they use blended, self-paced, and mastery-based learning to better serve their students. We believe teachers learn best from each other, so this is our way of lifting up the voices of leaders and innovators in our community. This is the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.
All right. Hey, y'all. It's Toni Rose, Deanna, they, them pronouns, the designated hype person here at MCP. And I'm joined by Vera Cubero, emerging technologies consultant for the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, where she leads North Carolina's AI implementation and was instrumental in publishing North Carolina's AI Guidelines, a comprehensive guidebook for education leaders. Now, this is something really dope because we're both in the group Women in AI and Education, and I got to join in a webinar as a participant and learn all about Vera's role and all of her thoughts and the process and the journey of like really creating this comprehensive guidebook for leaders, because AI literacy is so important and there's a lot of feelings behind AI. And so I am really excited to have Vera here with us to have a conversation about all of that. So welcome, Vera.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's really exciting to be in this space with you. And thank you so much again for saying yes to the podcast. Shout out to LinkedIn so that I could slide into your DMs and ask if you wanted to be on the podcast. And so before we get started, what is currently bringing you joy?
Outside of the AI world, I'm doing a lot of gardening these days, and I find that really grounds me. No pun intended, but bring me a lot of joy these days.
Yeah. And I hear it's just really great when it comes to like meditation and it being so peaceful. And so kudos to all the gardeners out there. I know we have a lot of them. It's like one of those hobbies that are getting picked up a lot. So I love that so much. So y'all listeners, I did say a little bit about what Vera's bio included, but I highly recommend that you check out our page so you can see a little bit more of what she does. But I am interested in, just telling us a little bit more about who you are and how you started your education journey.
Okay, well, I'm actually almost 30-year veteran now of public education, so we'll be retiring soon from the Department of Public Instruction. So I actually began as a teacher assistant when my children were little. I worked as a teacher assistant and a writing coach for the first 3 years, and then I was into a classroom teacher in middle school. I taught English language arts and social studies in grades 6, 7, and 8 for about 14 years. That's a special role for sure. And then I transitioned into a role as a digital learning specialist for the school I worked at, and then did that role for about a year and a half. And then I was brought into the district level in the district as a digital learning specialist there. And then about 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, this role became available at the Department of Public Instruction as Western Region Digital Learning Consultant. And so I took that role, and that's the role I was in when ChatGPT dropped on the world in November of 2022, and had already had some interest in AI and had taken some classes and things. So I dug right in, started learning, building content to try to help guide educators in using AI because it was very obvious it was going to be hugely impactful. And so through that work, we had decided to start creating some guidelines, and I was instrumental in that. And so they ended up seeing the need for a position to focus solely on AI. And so they created this role for me that I have now. So, and that brings us to now.
Oh my goodness. What a lovely, lovely journey there. It was like literally going from this to this to this to this. It just like worked out really well. Right. And so, you were in the position when ChatGPT came out. Do you remember how you felt when that came out? Was it more of like a positive, a negative reaction? How was that?
Well, I felt very positive. It was very, even as bad as it was, you think back now on the 3.5 version that first launched, looking back now, it was horrible. But at that time, it was just astounding how good it was. And I had toyed around a little bit with some like machine learning and things like that. But that generative AI technology, I had not had the experience of interacting with it. So I was astounded. and very quickly started, just calculating how that was going to impact the classroom and education, and so looking at it, first of all, as a time saving, because as a teacher for many years, I know the time is the most valuable commodity they have. And it was very obvious very, very quickly how it could really help teachers. And so I felt it was going to be positive. I had no idea how quickly it was going to advance and change. And where we are now, I never could have predicted 3 years ago that it was going to move that rapidly. But here we are.
Yeah. And I remember also when ChatGPT came out, I was so excited for it because I was like, oh my goodness, look at all of these things that we could do in a matter of seconds, in a matter of minutes, right? So I really love that. But then you coming into this role and you having also that teacher mindset, the coaching and the TA and all of the hats that you had on prior to your position, what were some of the misconceptions that you were like anticipating from educators, or even like the resistance that you were like, oh, this is probably going to trip up a lot of teachers and leaders? Did you have any of that as you were going through and learning about the learning models? Were there some, kind of like hesitation, resistance that you anticipated that teachers and leaders would have?
Yeah, well, it didn't take very long at all before ChatGPT wasn't the only name in town. And so the blocking and banning and trying to, it was very quickly obvious that students were also going to use it, and teachers loved the idea of it saving time, didn't love so much the idea of students saving time on their homework. And so that became apparent pretty quickly. First, of course, everybody was just able to block ChatGPT, but then all of these other apps started building off on it and coming available. So it's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole with the district tech leaders trying to keep everything blocked. And so that academic integrity discussion, that was one early on that I knew was going to be a problem, and it continues to be. We still continue to see that as a number one concern for both teachers and also parents. A lot of parents are expressing concern about it as well, and some students as well. Some students also are amazingly insightful, and a lot of them have that same concern, that other students are going to use it and it's going to give them an unfair advantage. And so that continues to be a big one.
And how have you experienced or seen really like training for teachers when it comes to AI? Because I know that I'm working with a middle school English teacher. I was also a former middle school English teacher, love. And one of the questions is like, how do I create assignments that students don't use AI for? And I was like, oh, let's brainstorm all of this, right? So do you think that there's training that's happening with that of like, not necessarily banning AI, but like how to utilize AI in a way that's more efficient and effective for all stakeholders?
Yeah, and that's something I've been heavily focused on the last couple of years in particular is, when we realize that the technology is here and it's so accessible everywhere, that you really can't prevent kids from using it and that you can't detect it fairly or equitably, that we have to start re-envisioning how we do school. And so instructional redesign is an absolute must. We can't keep designing instruction the way that we've been designing it for 100 years for the factory model of education, because students, if you're giving students a multiple choice assessment, a formulaic 5-paragraph essay, the typical assignments that we've relied on, our whole institutions have relied on for so long, those are just becoming less and less applicable now. And so we have to start thinking about how do we do it differently. And fortunately, differently means better in this case. We've also been talking for the 30 years I've been in public education about critical thinking and how we need to increase critical thinking. But I've seen cycles of time where that's been a heavy focus, but I've never really seen a whole lot of momentum or success in that. And so I think this forces us to really look at that differently. And so if we redesign assessments to make them un-AIable, we're also redesigning them to infuse more of that critical thinking and those other durable skills that are so relevant and so important to our students now. And so I've been doing a lot of work focused on like micro PBL, like short cycle, standards aligned, project-based learning type assessments. And I've created an app that we use with training our teachers, which kind of shows a teacher that you can take any standard in your standards, because we can't just ditch our standards. They have things they have to teach. But you can use AI to come alongside you as a partner and help co-create a lesson to teach that standard in a way that's meaningful and relevant to the students, and also bring in local context. And so the AI's ability to synthesize and access information, brainstorm, partner, really helps you do those things much more quickly and effectively than you could alone. And so I hope that we see more of a resurgence of that, this kind of PBL type assessments, because our students know, we've had several forums where we've had student speakers, and they're concerned about the future. They're concerned that schools are not preparing them for the roles or for the lack of jobs that they're going to see in the future. And so I think that kind of is a double-edged sword. It helps make sure that's really the only way you can guarantee academic integrity, is to give them an assignment that they can't just put into AI and spit something out in a few seconds. But it also is going to ensure that we're preparing them for the future. I always quote John Dewey. He said in the 1920s that if we teach today's children as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. And that couldn't be more relevant than it is today. It's forcing a lot of angst in teachers, though, because it's not what they were taught. It's not how they were taught. And so there's a learning curve. And unfortunately, our professional development is not as well-founded or as grounded and as widespread as I would like for it to be, because a lot of people still think this is something you can just do an hour PD, you can squeeze it in, and then they're all AI literate. And yay, that's just not the way it goes. And so needing that really, they need that just grounding of an hour, but then they need that job embedded ongoing PD where they can communicate with other teachers and bounce ideas off and success stories and struggles and talk things over and do it in a way that applies to their role, whatever that role is. And so I think we need a whole lot more of that with a focus on instructional redesign.
And I was thinking too that that's such a great reminder for all stakeholders and not just for teachers, right? But like parents and students and all of that. I love that you elevated student voices here, because I think sometimes we forget about students because they are ultimately the ones being impacted about this. And so there are I spent the weekend with some high schoolers from all over the nation, right? And they'd brought up the AI concerns, right? Like, hey, how do I become this when AI can do it already, right? Like, how do you continue to inspire and motivate students when the AI can do this for us already. So how do you navigate that? And those were just like really great questions for adults to kind of sit through and reflect and like figure out. But it's also really important that we collaborate with our students, right? To see like, okay, these are their concerns. Let me see also if they have any ideas, because sometimes student ideas are so much better than our own ideas. And I know that when I was in the classroom, I took a lot of time just creating tasks and then putting it in front of students and then being like, this is not okay. I don't like this at all. I don't want to do this. And so it's just kind of like it really challenged me and pushed me to, again, collaborate, create the space where we can collaborate with our students to figure out like what is more relevant to them. How can they apply the content, the standards, the skills that we're learning in the classroom in their everyday life? And when we're thinking about the assessment, right, with AI, like as teachers, we really do have to rewire our brains on what assessment looks like, right? When we think about Bloom's taxonomy, it can no longer be the identify and define. It has to be in the creating and the application. And sometimes the creating can be a little iffy too, because AI can create it, right? And so now it's like, oh, now we really have to go into the application. And I feel like if students can apply it in their own lives, that's when they truly understand the skill that we're teaching in the classroom, right? And so there's that push to be in this application part. I've had lots of conversations about AI, and something that comes up all the time is that it saves time for educators. And I think a lot of the times, sometimes teachers are like, well, that's not really enough for me to start learning more about AI, right? Like I still see AI as like this big thing that I cannot tackle. And so you keep telling me that I'm going to save time, but like the learning curve is actually going to add more time because I'm not getting the proper training. I don't have the time to process, to reflect, to implement properly. And so those are all things that are like, that's real, right? That is a reality for a lot of teachers. And I love also this reminder too, Vera, that you said it can't just be an hour. And a lot of the times our professional development is like an hour, good luck. go do your thing. Let us know how it goes, right? And so this accountability piece also falls off because teachers know, oh, you're not actually going to hold me accountable for this. You only gave me an hour, knowing that like I'm not going to be able to process and do all the things that you want me to do. And so this ongoing piece, I also like to remind our listeners that ongoing piece could be a year long, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Like it is ongoing. It can't just be like, I'll do it for the semester. And like you said, AI changes so drastically, so quickly that 1 hour is going to be irrelevant 2 months later, or maybe 4 weeks later, right? So I really love this conversation, the thing that, you're pushing for, like, let's redesign what instructional model, what the instructional teaching and learning practices are so that students are going to be prepared in the real world outside of just like compliance and still doing the same thing that we've been doing. I really like that you mentioned John Dewey because I say this all the time too, Vera. I'm always like, John Dewey said this. Like if someone from the 1800s were to come into our classrooms, they know exactly how it works. But if everything else has changed, education has not. And we're trying so hard, and a lot of people are holding on because that is their comfort. That is what they've known all their lives. And it's scary to move away from that. And also like, let's sit in that discomfort and do better. Right. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that, Vera. I was just like, yes to all of those. And so let's talk a little bit more about your work with North Carolina's generative AI implementation, recommendations and considerations for PK through 13 public schools, right? Like, so that's like that's babies all the way up to like 18, 19-year-olds, right? So I'm curious how the logistics, how long did this take you? Who are your thought partners? What were some of the barriers that you came across? What were some wins and lessons that you also got from doing this work?
Okay, well, we started working on our guidelines in August of 2023. And so that summer I had been going around. We have a summer conference for teachers and been doing AI training. It was very early on still, but I did a session called Power of the Prompt, showing teachers how to use how to effectively prompt and how to get more out of AI systems. And a lot of them at that time, of course, was their first introduction. And it was the best PD I'd ever done because it really did show them immediately the time that they were going to save. But that was kind of the angle of it, is save teachers time. But I had created a lot of things to go along with that. And our CIO, the state CIO, Chief Information Officer, Vanessa Wren, was actually in Washington, D.C. at a conference of state leaders about the same time. And the discussion was about AI. And that was about the time that New York City, I think, banned ChatGPT in their districts. And they asked her, was she going to recommend that in North Carolina? And she came out immediately saying, no, it's obvious students need to learn this. So she came back and convened a committee to create guidance. And I had been pushing for guidance too, and had been doing a lot of work. So I got nominated to serve on the committee. But we also brought in a lot of other voices because we wanted to make sure we had, the cybersecurity lens, the data privacy lens. So we brought in people from those departments. The career and technical education was already working on something also. So we brought them in. We brought in somebody from our exceptional children's department, our accessibility specialists. So we brought together a lot of different people. Then that was really important that all of those voices were at the table. And then we just kind of all sort of brain dumped and, from our lens, what we felt like was most important to include in the guidelines. And Dr. Ashley McBride was also kind of heading up, and we had a digital learning plan that came out about the year before that had 5 focus areas. And we like to kind of ground everything on that. So I really recommend that if you're putting out guidelines, is that you connect it with what you're already doing. And so we connected it with our digital learning plan. It worked really, really well to kind of organize it around those 5 focus areas. And so after everybody we had a few meetings and everybody kind of hashed out some things and what was most important from their lens. And we did some research and things and kind of got a draft, but it was, had different voices, it didn't flow well because you have all these different people writing it, had some repetition. So I kind of became the editor of it and put it all in a consistent voice and made sure that things were in the right area where they belonged. But I also had created a lot of things already, a lot of frameworks and things, and pulled those into it because we wanted it to be something that someone who, because at that time, very few people knew much about AI. And so we wanted it to be like an AI 101 also. And so it also has a lot of those kinds of things that you can learn from if you're a learner, and if you're a teacher, if you're looking for something to implement, or a leader, it has things that you can take and actually use in your practice. And so we started in August, and we were able to finish it in December, and we got it published in January. And so it took us about 6 months, but a lot of the pre-work had been done with some of the frameworks and things that I'd already created. But that was pretty quick turnaround, really, for a state agency to get something published. But also, we did it as guidelines, not policy. And that makes a big difference. First of all, for speed, obviously, if something's policy or law, there's a lot more time in getting that out. But we wanted it to be a living document from the beginning, because even then things were changing very quickly. Of course, now they're like warp speed. Things are changing so much more quickly. But we wanted to be able to keep it up to date as a living document and change it as we learn more, because we were all learning, still are, and we're still learning. But also as the technologies changed, we found several times over the last couple of years where we've needed to go in and update something because of a new capability of the model, either a capability that it allows us, or it could have introduced a new threat. Like we've learned a lot over the last year or two about the dangers of companion chatbots and things like that we've wanted to keep it up to date with. And so it's been an ongoing process. Haven't revised it this month, but about every month it gets some kind of a minor revision. No real major revisions, but we get together as a group and discuss any kind of major revisions other than just updating model numbers or something like that. We get together and kind of have a consensus from the group before we push out any big changes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That is really quick to be able to publish something so large in a matter of 6 months. And my follow-up question was, hey, things are changing all the time. And you said, yeah, we do monthly revisions on it, which is really good. And I love that. So, what are some lessons that you've learned as you were creating these guidelines to keep others from making the same mistakes? Because I know during the webinar with Amanda, we were talking about how not all states actually had guidelines, right? And so there's still, because again, it's a lot of work. I mean, like you said, there are a lot of moving pieces, lots of perspectives, lots of time to do this. But what are some things that you learned that you were like, you know what, if I were to do this again, I wouldn't do it this way. I would actually do it that way.
Well, trying to think of a lesson learned. I guess the biggest one is just realizing, if you are creating your guidelines, that while you're waiting to make it perfect, the world is spinning and moving under your feet. And so, it definitely wasn't perfect when we published, and we could have waited another 6 months and hashed it out more. But in the meantime, our districts were sitting there with no guidance, and we had people doing a variety of different things across the state. So I feel like imperfect guidance is better than no guidance. And just being, just realizing from the beginning that it will change, and making sure that your audience knows that it will change. If I had it to do over again, one thing I would have done from the beginning, and I would definitely recommend districts do, is to make sure you do get those student, parent, educator voices. And that will increase the time. And we don't, as a state agency, that's a little different than from a district, but pull in a committee or something to make sure you're getting those voices. We have a lot of stuff for our districts to try to help them create guidelines. And one thing that we've done is created surveys that they can deliver to staff, students, and families before they do their guidance, so that their guidance is not just based on generic research, but on what their actual communities are doing. And so, especially if you're in a school or a district, I would recommend doing that and including those voices from the beginning, and getting some of those people to sit on your committees that are in your schools.
Yeah, and providing different ways to get involved in the committee, right? Because again, keeping in mind like our family working hours may be different than ours. And it's also, again, just keeping in mind that accessibility is really important. So providing different options for folks to get involved. And what a great reminder, because I know sometimes not sometimes, all the time as adults, we're like, oh, we know what's best. This is what we're doing. I'm the expert. Let me just make all the decisions without even having conversations with the students and the teachers and leaders and families who may be impacted by the decisions that we make. I also really love this thing, Vera, where you said imperfect is actually better than like waiting, because again, in my head, I was like, well, yeah, no human being is perfect, right? And we can't actually make a perfect piece. There's always some kind of iteration or revision that we need to do to continue to improve. And I think the important thing is that the communication piece is there. I think the transparency of like, hey, this isn't this, we may have made mistakes. This is gonna change, right? Subject to change. And I love that piece, because I know as someone who may be getting these guidelines, right? If I didn't have that understanding, or if I didn't hear it outright, I'd be like, oh, this is the finished product, right? So I think it's good to be reminded that like, no, this is imperfect. We're going to do lots of iterations on this, but for right now, this is the basic of it, the basic foundation of the guidelines. And it's better to have that than to not have, because I think sometimes, again, when we're so overwhelmed, we just freeze and we do nothing, right? Because we don't know where to start.
I was just saying, I think a lot of people are still there. They're paralyzed, still waiting to put out guidelines. And I mean, it's been 3.5 years and in normal years, but with AI, that's like a decade at least of progress we've seen and how it's impacting. And I mean, providing nothing is definitely not better than providing something imperfect that needs to be added to or adapted and changed along the way. So I would really recommend anybody that doesn't have any guidelines, if you have nothing to direct your students, your staff, your families on how AI is going to be used, then it's just going to be the wild, wild west, and you have nothing to fall back on. So some guidelines and a plan is definitely better than not.
Yeah, and it's going to be chaotic. And it'll probably still be chaotic in the beginning when people see the guidelines, right? And that's okay also.
Hey there, listeners. This is Zach. I have some announcements for you this week. First, you can join the Modern Classrooms Project on June 23rd for the Leadership Collaborative Summit 2026, a free virtual event for K-12 school and district leaders. This year's theme is personalized by design, and it's built around a core belief. Every student learns differently, and the best learning communities are built to act on that. You'll hear from principals, district leaders, and coaches from across the country who are making instruction more human through mastery-based, student-centered approaches and getting real results. Every session is led by practitioners and designed to give you strategies you can act on this fall. Help us spread the Modern Classrooms model. You can refer a friend and earn swag. Swag is stuff we all get. Know a colleague or school leader who would love our summer learning opportunities? Fill out the form linked in the show notes, and Modern Classrooms will take it from there. MCP will reach out to them with information on the model and their exclusive discount code. Again, you can find links for that and the Leadership Collaborative Summit 2026 in the show notes. But for now, let's get back into it with Vera and Toni Rose.
Speaking of reactions/responses, when y'all published the guidelines, how did leaders take it?
Well, we had a mix. Most people were glad to have something because, I think they were waiting. They're waiting to hear from the state. Most of our leaders were, and most people were very supportive of them. But they feel a little overwhelmed also because there's a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of our district leaders. When you're dealing with minors, it's a whole different ballgame than businesses because there's so much to consider. And so there's still is a lot of fear and uncertainty around some of the mainstream tools, and especially with the news cycles of the last year or so, and kind of this trend toward, concern about screen times. And so they're dealing with a lot. And then, of course, schools if AI were the only thing they had to deal with, a lot of them would have made a lot more progress, but they have so many other things on their plate with budgetary concerns, mental health, the dealing with the aftermath of COVID and all of that. And so I think they like having some guidance and they like having something to fall back on. But at the same time, there's a struggle to feel like you're keeping pace and doing what you need to do as well. And, we're still not at a place where we have large language models that are approved for K-12. The only one is the Gemini model. So ChatGPT, and I mean, you can, as a individual, you can get it from 13 and up, but there's not a K-12 version of that or Claude, and I know those are both working on it. But that also is a concern because, yes, I want to teach AI literacy, but how can I do that if I don't have any tools? If I don't have funding to buy the best tools, then I'm giving up a lot of cybersecurity protections and privacy protections. And so the funding is not there. Our funding models haven't kept pace either. Laws are not keeping pace. And so we still, have textbook funds when nobody's really buying textbooks. And so we have to kind of, our laws and procedures don't ever keep pace with technology. So there's still a lot of angst about how do we do this and how do we do it well with the current constraints that they have. And they're always having to make very difficult budgetary choices and also staffing. Yes, we know they need AI literacy training, but do we have the staff to do that? And unfortunately, a lot of those staff are being cut in North Carolina, like the digital learning specialists and even some media coordinators. We're seeing those positions cut. And historically, those are the people who lead this kind of training in districts. And so that makes it even more difficult. That is kind of a perfect storm where the technology is moving as fast as it is and changing everything as fast as it is. But, the funding causes us not to have the staff to lead the training or the funds to purchase the prime tools, the premium tools, which are going to be better tools, but also have more safety features. And then, of course, there's also been a lot of privacy breaches recently in the recent years, and that has everybody a little concerned as well. And so it's not an easy path. It's not easy for our district leaders, not easy choices to make. And there are some tools out there that are more safe, that allow some teacher oversight, like the Magic School AI. So then there are a few more of those, but there's also, cost associated with them. And so, and again, our funding models haven't caught up. So it's a tough time to be an education leader. And I don't envy their decisions because I know they're difficult, but they're moving at different paces. We like to have a statewide vision, but ultimately we have local control, and each district and each community is different, and how quickly they're moving, how much they're adapting.
And thank you for that perspective, Vera. Yeah, because I didn't even think about the funding, right? I didn't think about like the policies and the laws that are still so behind, and then all of the positions being cut. You're right. Like, what is the capacity? Where is the time? Who's going to be able to do all of this? So yeah, I too am not jealous of just leaders having to go through and making all those decisions, right? Oh my goodness. That just gave me a headache. Wow.
It's a lot for them to do.
Yeah. I just lost my train of thought because all I can think about was oh my goodness, that is a lot. Like, you're really pushing up against so many different things. And so then how do you prioritize the things that are important without funding, without capacity, without people to do the work? And so, okay. One last question, Vera. I know that you had mentioned AI literacy throughout this episode. And I would like for us to define what AI literacy is, because I think there's a lot of, maybe there's no clarity of what that means, or rather a lot of misconceptions that go with AI literacy. And I'm looking at the document that you had shared with us too, with the guidelines. And listeners, we're going to provide this in the show notes as well, so you can access it. But you have 3 columns here: AI awareness, AI literacy, and then AI fluency. And you'd mentioned AI literacy. Can you just give us briefly a definition of what that means to teach AI literacy?
Yeah, well, I feel like AI literacy is the knowledge and skills to use AI safely, effectively, and ethically, and that's just a very simple definition. But what you mentioned, the three buckets, the AI awareness, AI literacy, and AI fluency, that's from our timeline, our AI literacy timeline, because we also want to make sure that we're considering age appropriateness. And in North Carolina, and every state doesn't agree with this, every school doesn't, but we feel like for our K-5 or PK-5, our youngest learners, that they can learn about AI and they need to be learning about it, but we don't encourage the actual interaction with chatbots at that age because the technology is just too nascent and too unreliable. And also, I feel like the AI literacy of the staff is not where it needs to be to put them in charge of exposing children to those kinds of tools. But they can still learn about it. They can learn, that they can learn basic like sorting, and they can learn some pattern recognition. They can learn media literacy, that everything they see is not believable, that AI can create images and video and things that are not real. And so there's a lot they can do in elementary. But in the middle school, we feel like the students really need to start learning, like, what is AI? How does it work? What are some of the concerns and benefits of using the tools? And start building that awareness a little more, expanding their awareness to actually engaging with the tools, because you can't really be AI literate if you've never engaged with the tool. And that's why we don't call it AI literacy in K-5, because if you're only hearing about it, I could talk to you all day about AI until you actually plug in yourself and start using it. There's a lot you're going to need to, you're going to be left unknown. So in middle school, we do encourage them to start doing it in very teacher directed ways. Again, using something like a Magic School or a school AI chatbot that's created by the teacher with a specific purpose. And those tools allow the teacher oversight to be able to watch the chats. They get alerts if something concerning is put in the chat, or if the students are off task, they get redirected. And so there's a lot that can be done in middle school to kind of help them to start really understanding the tools and building that ability to evaluate, that human judgment piece that we're very, very strong on. But then by high school, really, if we're going to prepare kids to go into the world, they need to be moving to AI fluency. I like to say that AI literacy is the floor, not the ceiling, really. In the world as fast as it's moved, and especially in the last few months, if they go into the world and they are not able to actually work with the tools and actually even manage, and it sounds freaky and new age to say it, but manage teams of agents is what it's not just anymore that you're just teaching kids how to work with a chatbot. Now they're the autonomous agents and teams of agents. And so we really have got to start moving into giving them opportunities to do more of that in high school. And if we don't, what I'm afraid it's going to happen is that divide that we've talked about for years, that digital divide, it's going to exacerbate it. And we're going to see some of our lower wealth districts and students from impoverished families that are going out into the world and don't have these experiences, and they're going to be competing for jobs against the more affluent, privileged kids who do, and it's just going to be another stumbling block for them. And so I think it's really, really imperative that for equity's sake that we're making sure that this is done everywhere, that students everywhere are having these experiences, not just our affluent, not just in the computer science classes, not just in the AP classes, because this is a skill that I feel like is going to be equally important to all the other skills they're learning.
Yeah. And I mean, also chiming in with AI, being able to help and support students with IEPs, right? Especially like students who are neurodivergent, like there's so much usefulness with the AI once they have that AI literacy piece, right?
Yeah. I mean, it can be life-changing for students with disabilities for sure. Just and we haven't seen anything yet. Some of the things that are coming, but it could be life-changing for them. It's not just like when I was a teacher, we had something called Dragon Speak Freely, and I thought it was just amazing because I had students who were dyslexic and they could speak to their computer and they could type and it would speak back, but it sounded like R2D2, and it was about maybe 60% accurate. I mean, these tools are phenomenal. And for language learning, you've got now,
Yes.
the the earbuds from Google that will translate live, and Google Meet translate live. So there's so much that can help level the playing field for some of our students. And then there are tools that can translate ASL, and they're, just amazing the capability that some of the tools have. And in the future, I fully believe that there will be, like there was at the Olympics last year, like the AI-enabled exoskeletons that allow people to walk who've not been able to walk. I mean, there's so much of the Neuralink, allowing the people with ALS that have not been able to speak for years that are able to use it to communicate. So there's so much more that sounds very futuristic, but it's actually being developed now. There's something called Project Blindsight that's thinks they're going to be able to restore vision, for the blind. So there's so much potential there for people with disability, and we want to make sure they're not left out of the discussion as well.
Yeah, and again, just naming also the fact that this is a lot of work. It is challenging. It can be time consuming. And also, I wanted to end this episode with saying what you said is like, figure out what you're already doing and add to it, right? So that it's less for your brain to think, oh, I got to create a whole new thing. When in actuality, you probably already have some guidelines. You already probably have some policies in place. And so look at what you already have and embed these things there as opposed to creating a brand new thing. And also this reminder piece too of like, you can't actually be AI literate if you've never used it. So I love that push too, because it goes back to the critical thinking skills that you mentioned earlier. If we don't use critical thinking skills, we're not going to have it either. So like, let's continue to practice these skills. Let's continue to be aware. Let's continue to approach it with curiosity. And ask lots of questions, right? As opposed to avoiding it and banning it and like seeing it as all bad, because this is something that I think we're not going to get away from. Our kids are always going to have access to this. So we might as well teach students, give them some guidelines as opposed to letting them do it on their own, because then that could be where all the problems and the chaos come in.
And I would just add to that for anybody who's afraid of it and kind of thinks they don't have the skills, the number one skill you need is just being able to communicate. And if you're a teacher, you have that. The clearer you are with your directions, the better your results are going to be. There's no magic formula, really. Just be very clear and direct and give lots of details, and you'll be amazed what you can create.
And if you mess up, it's okay. Right? Well, Vera, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your experiences and your expertise. I know that I learned a lot, and I know that our listeners appreciate all the things that you've shared with us. And so again, thank you again for just your time and your energy. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for listening. Listeners, remember you can always email us at podcast@modernclassrooms.org, and you can find the links to topics and tools we discussed, as well as more info on this week's announcements and events in the show notes for this episode at podcast.modernclassrooms.org. We'll have this episode's recap and transcript uploaded to the Modern Classrooms blog on Friday, so be sure to check there or check back in the show notes for this episode if you'd like to access those. And if you enjoy our podcast and it's been helpful in supporting you to create a blended, self-paced, mastery-based learning environment, we would love if you could leave a review. That does help other folks find our podcast. And of course, you can always learn the essentials of our model, if you want to go beyond the podcast, through our free course at learn.modernclassrooms.org. And you can follow us on social media at modernclassproj. That's PROJ. We are so appreciative of all the hard work you do for students and schools. Have a great week, and we'll be back next Sunday with another episode of the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.